and join the conversation.
So it makes a lot of sense. People are obviously getting a lot from it.
Yeah.
You mentioned the word ally though. Like it's almost an arena of combat.
Well, ally is a friend.
Sure.
Is a supportive person in the community and is a part of the community. So allies play a big part in helping advocate for these safe spaces, maybe when other people, these sexual and gender minorities can't. So they're a huge part of the equation, and they do a lot of work in the community as well too.
Back to educators, what type of training, I suppose? I mean, that's a tough one. What type of training do you think educators need in order to identify? Is it a sensitivity thing? Is it just a knowledge base?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. Sensitivity training would be ideal in addressing any preconceived notions that educators themselves might have regarding the LGBT community.
Which, come on, I'm sure exists.
There's a big push for it in education and in medicine.
Yes.
There's a lot of inherent bias in medical professionals and in teachers that they pass on to their students, or they reflect back on LGBT members of their classes. So
I think historically they didn't have any training or preparation or around conversations around sexuality, not just LGBT stuff. But it's really kind of exciting that the University of Calgary, the Faculty of Education, the nursing faculty is bringing in community resources like Camp Firefly and Firefly in Schools. The Calgary Sexual Health Center has training sessions for teachers. A lot of them are voluntary, and it's kind of a singing to the choir situation where we have those caring and compassionate allies, but we are doing staff trainings for entire schools now, which is fantastic to see.
Would I be out of line to suggest that maybe the fact that it's voluntary now should be shifted into a mandatory state?
I think as far as educators go, it should be a mandatory part of the teacher or of the education curriculum. Yeah. When it comes to things like peer-based education, making it mandatory as far as their sexual education curriculum and their general comm class curriculum, that should be compulsory. Getting involved in community projects, obviously, you can't force people to do that.
No, of course.
But having the resources available, having gender equity centers on campuses, that is the kind of thing where people will just get involved if they see an event happening, or they'll engage in a conversation that they normally wouldn't.
You can also see a dramatic shift in schools that set that precedent and say, we're going to do a staff training on LGBT stuff or sexuality. It sets the tone for the entire school community. Yeah. By having a GSA or by having this training and having this conversation, we're saying to the students, the staff, the student body, and the greater community that this is an important issue, one that we can't neglect. And when we talk about that those suicide rates, and amongst them is mental health, drug and alcohol abuse, kind of a great way to frame it is to think of it's not a matter of morals or religion, as a lot of people like to take it that way. It's a matter of public health and safety.
Definitely.
Everyone
Excellent
should
point.
come to school
and
and feel safe. And
folks, we're going to jump to a quick break here and check in with the Rant Pack. We'll be back right after this.
I think that it's important that we start to look at other ways that we can support and just talk about children who might be growing up, identifying being lesbian, bisexual, gay, what have you, because we can. We're more of an open society where we're embracing that kind of thing now, and even if it's a matter of having speakers come into schools at younger ages and just addressing it, I think just ultimately making it okay for children to identify it however they want to identify it.
I feel really upset that this isn't discussed enough. I think as if kids don't have enough issues and problems like questioning their identity and who they are, the fact that this is almost taboo of a subject to talk with your children about is it's really problematic. I think we need to have these discussions with kids, and it needs to be just open season for anyone to talk about.
Sadly, bullying is still a huge issue in schools, and I'm sure it's only exacerbated when we're talking about gender identity and sexuality. It's hate, is what it is. Frankly, that's boiling down to hate. Is the CPS working in conjunction with schools? Are we doing enough to combat hate?
I would probably have to say no. Mostly just because, when kids bully each other, it's usually reflective of other problems, but it's also bolstered by things like exposure to social media, desire for peer acceptance, all of these things that can be addressed institutionally, but usually, the most you'll get is a seminar on why it's bad to bully and why you shouldn't hurt people's feelings because it's mean.
Yeah.
Maybe not immediately in the schools. Maybe people may not see Calgary Police Service doing a lot, but they are actually doing a lot in the community. I actually coincidentally sit on a board with the Calgary Police Service. It's the Sexuality and Gender Diversity Board, and they liaise with the Chief of Police on LGBT issues, and they are incredibly involved in the community. They come to the GSA roundtables. They've come into the programs with me as well too, and they're also setting that precedent that we have this specific board that's going to talk about these issues, and they're making those efforts. They also have a lot of programming to Stay Smart, Stay Safe, which is kind of like an elementary-based program. I don't know it super well, but they're doing work.
They are involved.
Yeah.
They are involved.
Yeah.
I guess maybe I'm just a guy that's, well, sometimes punishment is due, I suppose. And again, I go back to the 14 times more likely to commit suicide. That stems from hate. I can't help but think that there should be some real punishment for some of these kids. I don't know if that's necessarily happening.
I feel like it's less of an issue of punishment and more of an issue of education, because usually like that hate doesn't just like happen. It comes from somewhere, and usually that source is ignorance, and that's something that can be addressed. Like punishing somebody for something they do wrong, well sometimes necessary, doesn't really help the situation. It just exacerbates it. Like that could just lead to them disliking these people further because they like blame them for their predicament, or like they blame them for stuff they have to go through. It's misplaced, but it happens. Whereas if you can show somebody why what they do is harmful, show them the impacts that it has on people, and show them why it's problematic, that's a lot more effective.
I do think that's very idealistic.
It is.
Is it not?
I think there needs to be consequences, though. You know, there needs to be realistic and appropriate consequences. And I think a stress I have with the bullying word, it's a real big buzzword. In every school, they have bullying assemblies. They're actually sometimes minimizing the effects of what we're actually looking about and talking about. It's harassment, it's assault, it's abuse, and these are criminal
That's
acts.
right. This is what I'm saying.
You know,
exactly.
and so we had a Gay Straight Alliance meeting where a youth that comes to the meeting talked about how he gets death threats on the daily, and was like, it's no biggie. But then the police officer, the diversity liaison guy, stopped and said, hey, you know what? This isn't a rite of passage. This isn't what people just go through. This is actually a criminal offense and needs to be reported. And it needs, there needs to be safe avenues to do that, whether that's to a principal, a teacher, or a police officer.
Yeah. I think that one of the best tools as far as mild bullying is obviously education. And when it comes to criminal offenses like sexual harassment, then you need punishments, but there should be punishments that should also be rehabilitative. You don't just want to reinforce people's ideas. So maybe having them do community service, working at
well, if only just to set a precedent for those that they may associate with their circle of peers.
Yeah.
The cool thing about the education programs, and I think the key to that, is empathy. So the Firefly in Schools program, which is cool, it's kind of a spin-off from the camp. We asked kids at camp, what can we do to make your lives feel safer? And they said education. So we actually bring the youth in the classrooms with us. And kind of the premise of the program is that when someone realizes that they know someone that's LGBT, whether that's their friend, their parents, their teacher, their colleague, their coworker, they will reassess their attitudes and values around homophobia because they care about these people, and will check their language and will think differently. And so cultivating empathy and challenging people to put yourself in someone else's shoes, whether you get it or not, is kind of a big piece of that.
That's a huge piece to it. And frankly, that's human nature. Somebody you care about, you're quick to understand where they're coming from. Just lend them an ear if you do care about them. The internet, social media. Now, there was a lot of talk of cyberbullying. I mean, I'm sure it still exists without a doubt. I think, maybe I'm off the mark here, but is there now a shift where some of these kids are now beginning to empower themselves through social media and the internet?
Yeah,
a
lot of them are. Social media is a powerful tool for education, for outreach, for being able to voice your thoughts and opinions to the public, to find like-minded people and connect with them, and to find people that despite the people in your physical space who condemn you, to find people that don't. But it's also a way for other people to remove the human element from a situation, and it can be used as a tool to harass people.
Definitely.
Without backlash and consequence. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's a great tool and a great resource, but it's also a way for people to kind of harm other people with no consequence to themselves.
What do the kids at the camp have to say about the
about social media? Yeah. Well, I think I don't know. I think people have different experiences depending on what level they work with it. But I think when I think about social media, I think that there's we talk about media literacy. how we look at TV and media images. There's kind of like an internet literacy that needs to be enforced, or not enforced, but cultivated in school curriculum, so that kids, when they find themselves in a situation where they're suffering from cyberbullying, how do they go and disclose? Who do they tell? How is it resolved and how is it supported? And I know a lot of the law systems are actually taking on steps to address cyberbullying.